My name is Agatha Reynolds, and on the morning that was supposed to be the start of a new life, my sister literally shoved me into the closet and turned the key. At first, I sincerely believed it was dark humor. I was standing there in my best jacket, holding my portfolio in trembling hands, mentally replaying the main points, when the door slammed shut with a dull thud. The click of the lock sounded like a gunshot, cutting me off from the world. Darkness washed over me instantly, thick and absolute, as if I'd been erased from reality. I slammed my fist on the door. The heavy wood only echoed. "Hey, stop it. This isn't funny. Open up right now." My voice, trying to be firm, nevertheless cracked. Her laughter echoed from outside, the same light and ringing one I'd heard since childhood. Always encouraged, always adored. "Relax," her muffled voice sounded sweet and smug. "Who cares about one interview? Just sit for an hour and think about the eternal. You're always over-dramatizing everything." An hour. My chance was 40 minutes away on the other side of town. My heart pounded so wildly that it became difficult to breathe. The air broke into short, useless spurts. My mind flashed back to sleepless nights poring over textbooks, years of whispered, "You're not up to it," and that quiet, ironclad promise I'd made to myself in the mirror. This day would be mine. And then I heard my mother's voice, calm and insipid, as if we were discussing what to make for dinner. "If not this, then something else," she said disinterestedly. "You probably would have failed anyway. Why waste time and upset everyone?" Their laughter merged. Sisters, sharp, triumphant. Mom's voice, tired, condescending. It was the soundtrack of my life, suddenly unbearable. I fell silent, pressing my hot forehead against the cool wooden surface. My fingers in my pocket clutched the casing of my phone. And in that sudden silence, something inside me broke, completely and irrevocably, like a bone that's finally been set so it can heal properly, because I realized there would be no interview today. But with icy, terrifying clarity, I also realized something else. This joke of theirs would cost them far more than they could have imagined. A few hours earlier, I'd come down to the kitchen of our house in suburban Denver, already dressed in my battle suit. My palms were sweaty, my stomach clenched from a mug of coffee and a flock of anxious butterflies. But I forced the corners of my lips upward. Today, everything was going to change. My parents were sitting at the table, their attention completely focused on my sister. She was scrolling through her phone, and it seemed as if the entire universe revolved around her notifications. She was wearing an enormous, shapeless hoodie, her hair pulled back into a messy bun. Not a care in the world. Why worry when the world was already collapsing at your feet? "Good morning," I said, frozen by the refrigerator, waiting for someone to even look at me. Mom didn't look up from the screen. Dad glanced at me, his eyes sliding over my jacket, as if I were a child dressed up in Mom's clothes. "Oh, you're so formal today," he said, already reaching for his mug. "Where are you headed?" I swallowed. We discussed this. I showed them the invitation letter, the company website, the schedule. Twice. The interview, I reminded her, trying to keep my voice steady, for graduate school, the very one I've been preparing for all these weeks. My sister snorted quietly, not even looking up from her cereal. "Oh, right, the great interview," she drawled, circling invisible quotation marks in the air. "That's what you call every Zoom call you have with that stranger from HR." Mom finally looked up, only to roll her eyes with a theatrical sigh. "Don't make a big deal out of it, Agatha," she said wearily. "You make everything sound like the apocalypse. It's just a meeting. If it doesn't work out, it's not your thing." Funny, when it came to my sister, nothing was ever simple. Her acceptance into her dream university turned into a huge party that was the talk of the neighborhood. Her small internship was marketed as a CEO appointment. And me? I was in the background, the one who quietly paid the bills, picked up extra shifts, studied in the corner of the living room while they bragged about her successes to anyone who would listen. I still remember watching her get selected for the cheerleading squad at 14, even though she'd missed half the tryouts. She's so naturally talented. That same week, I auditioned for the school drama club, gave it my all on stage until I cried, and no one even asked how it went. They just asked my sister to show off her new cheer. As I spread peanut butter on my toast, my hand trembled. A tiny smear fell onto the plate. "This isn't just a meeting," I said, forcing my voice to stay steady. "This could change my entire career. They're selecting a handful of people from all over the country. What makes you think they'll choose you?" My sister finally looked up. A mocking smirk played at the corners of her lips. It seemed like a joke, but beneath the surface, there was something else, a glimmer of defiance, or perhaps fear, as if the very thought of my success felt like a personal threat to her. For a split second, I caught it. Her face hardened when I mentioned the company's big name, her fingers clenching tightly around her spoon. Was she seriously afraid I might outshine her this time? Dad chuckled, pretending not to notice the tension. "Come on, don't tease your sister," he snapped. But his tone was light, condescending. You know how sensitive she is. Sensitive. There it was again. Every protest I made, every "it's not fair," came back down to that label. I wasn't being honest, I wasn't right, I was just sensitive. Perhaps that's why I spent years wondering, maybe the problem really was me? Am I exaggerating? Am I being jealous without reason? All these years of living in her shadow, was it simply my fate, something I had to accept? The air at the table grew thick and heavy. I took a sip of coffee to buy myself time, tasting a bitterness that wasn't just in the drink. "I really worked very hard for this," I said quietly but clearly. "I just want you to be proud of me too." My sister's eyes gleamed with a wet, false glint. "We'll be proud if you don't throw a tantrum and embarrass yourself," she drawled sweetly. "Just don't cry in the bathroom if they say no, okay?" A short, stifled laugh escaped Dad. He didn't mean to be cruel. That was the worst part. To him, it was just harmless family teasing. Mom smiled vaguely, already immersed in her phone again. "Don't pressure her. She's nervous enough as it is." These words weighed heavily on my shoulders. Nervous, sensitive, exaggerating. That was the version of me they'd created for themselves and nurtured until I almost began to believe it myself. But beneath the layer of humiliation, beneath the sting of their mild disdain, something sharper stirred. The question I barely dared ask myself: how much longer could I suffocate in this silence before I finally broke? If I had left right then, if I had drawn the line at that breakfast, maybe none of this would have happened. But I simply swallowed the lump of anger, checked the time on my phone, and forced a smile as fragile as thin ice. "I'll go finish getting ready," I said, pushing back my chair. "I don't want to be late." My sister flashed me a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Don't worry," she muttered. "You won't be late." At the time, I thought it was a feeble attempt at support. Later, I realized it was a promise. After breakfast, I went up to my room, mentally repeating potential questions like a mantra on which salvation depended. "Tell me about yourself. Your greatest strength? A situation in which you overcame difficulties." I didn't yet know that I was already living the answer to that last question. I just wasn't the heroine of my own story, yet. I was a victim of circumstances. I checked my reflection in the mirror one last time. My jacket fit perfectly. My hair was pulled back into a neat bun. My portfolio was in my bag. My phone was fully charged in my side pocket, with the company address and directions displayed on the screen. For the first time in a long time, I felt collected, competent, and ready. I stepped out into the hallway and almost collided with my sister. She was leaning against the wall, her arms crossed over her chest. She was clearly waiting. "You look serious," she said, looking me up and down. "Big day, huh?" I nodded cautiously, trying to step around her. "Yes, you know." She tilted her head to the side, as if examining a rare, strange specimen. "Can I tell you something, without your usual emotional reactions?" My stomach clenched. That kind of start never led to anything good. "What?" I asked, stopping. "There you go again," she said, gesturing vaguely in my direction. "You act like if this doesn't work out, your life will end. You're unbearably dramatic, Agatha. It's exhausting." I suppressed a sharp retort, the urge to shout that she had no idea what it was like to never be someone's first choice. Instead, I simply exhaled. It's important to me. It doesn't make me dramatic. It makes me ambitious. She smiled, but there was something prickly, venomous in her smile. Of course, ambitious. Then she stepped aside, pointing to a small door at the end of the hall. The very same closet. Go get an extra folder from there, a black one with a hardcover. You said you wanted extra copies of your resume, right? My heart was pounding so fast that my thoughts were jumbled. I didn't stop to consider why the folders had to be there. It seemed such a small, reasonable request. I walked past her, opened the door into a cramped space filled with coats, boxes, and the smell of mothballs, and reached for the light switch. And at that very moment, I felt a push in my back. It wasn't playful. It wasn't light. It was a sharp, deliberate blow that knocked me off balance. I staggered and flew into the darkness, my shoulder hitting the hard edge of the shelf. Before I could turn around, the door slammed shut with a dull thud. The click of the turning key sounded louder than any scream. "What the hell?" I blurted out, adrenaline rushing through my temples. I grabbed the handle and yanked with all my might. It didn't even budge. The door wasn't just closed, it was locked, on purpose. Her laughter, ringing and contented, filtered through the wood. "Relax," she said. "You're all worked up. You'll thank me later when you don't have a panic attack in some glamorous office because you're so nervous." Panic, thick and sticky, rose in my throat. "Open the door, right now. I'm not joking." My fist crashed down on the wood. "That's your problem, Agatha." Her voice was sweet and venomous. "Everything is a world-changing event for you. This is just one interview. If it doesn't work out, there'll be another. You're not going to die." I heard footsteps in the hallway. Then my mother's voice joined in, distant and irritated. "What's going on here?" "She's hysterical again," my sister answered easily. "I locked her in here for a while to calm her down. Otherwise, she'll work herself into a fit, like last time." My ears began to ring. Calm down? "Mom!" I screamed, pressing my face to the crack. "I'll be late. Tell her to open up." There was a pause. Brief, a single second, during which an ugly hope flared. What if? What if now? "If she misses, then it wasn't meant to be," Mom finally said, her voice weary and final. "Honestly, she's putting too much pressure on herself. Maybe you really are doing her a favor. If it doesn't work out, it will be different. She probably would have collapsed anyway, in this state." Their words, clear and undeniable, seeped under the door like carbon monoxide. There it was, the naked truth, unvarnished. They didn't even bother to disguise it when they decided for me that I couldn't do anything. In the suffocating, dusty darkness, something inside me began to break and reform, forming a new, more solid structure. My hands trembled, not from fear anymore, but from a strange, cold concentration. I fumbled for my phone in my pocket. The screen illuminated my face with a ghostly blue glow. 10:12 a.m. Interview at 11 a.m. Commute, at least half an hour without traffic. My window of opportunity was rapidly closing, while my own family was amusing themselves by speculating about how I would probably fail. My finger hovered over the icon for a split second, and then I did something I'd never done before. I opened the voice recorder app and pressed the big red record button. Their muffled voices filled the silence of the closet, turning into digital evidence. My sister's laughter, my mother's calm, deadly disdain. Precise statements that had been gnawing at me for years. She probably would have failed anyway. So dramatic. You're doing her a favor. I clutched the phone closer, as if it were a weapon I'd just found in the dark. This can't be, I whispered into thin air. Tears, stinging and bitter, welled up in my eyes. But I wasn't just crying because I was losing my chance. I was crying from the shock of realization. Here it was, finally, the naked, unvarnished sound of their true feelings toward me. And through this shock, another thought, clear and chilling, broke through. Is this really that line? That boundary I never allowed them to cross in their fantasies of decency? And they had just crossed it, without even noticing, like crushing a cigarette butt. I slammed my shoulder against the door again and again, but the sound was muffled, hopeless. My breath broke into short, hoarse sobs. It wasn't enough. Time was ticking, my chances expiring with every second. Could this really be my destiny? Flashed through my mind with a bitter smile. All these years they'd been gently but persistently pushing me aside, and when I finally decided to take a step forward, for myself, they simply slammed the door in my face. Literally. Finally, silence reigned in the hallway. I didn't know if they'd left or if they'd simply grown tired of listening to my fruitless attempts. But I knew one thing for sure. When I got out of here, everything would be different. Not just for me, and certainly for them. By the time my sister deigned to decide I'd calmed down enough, the future I'd imagined had already evaporated. I heard footsteps again, then the soft, mocking scrape of a key in the lock. The door swung open, and the harsh light from the hallway pierced my eyes. My sister stood in the threshold, leaning casually against the frame, her arms crossed over her chest. "See," she said, her voice tinged with irritating smugness. "You're okay. No hyperventilating. You're welcome." I stood there, looking at her, and it felt like everything inside me had gone numb from the impact, turning into a continuous hum of adrenaline and rage. The merciless numbers on my phone screen glowed in the dim hallway. 11:07. The interview had started 7 minutes ago. My heart didn't sink. It simply froze, turning into a lump of ice. "You knew what time it was." My voice sounded quiet, and my voice was unfamiliar. "You knew perfectly well." She blinked, then merely raised her shoulders in a casual, haughty grimace. "So what? It's just one interview. You would have panicked and screwed up anyway. At least now you don't have to blush in front of important people." I walked past, feeling my entire body shake with a fine, uncontrollable tremor. Every cell in my body screamed, pushed, punched the wall. But I simply walked into my room and slammed the door with a quiet but solid click. My hands were still shaking as I dialed the number, trying to pray to a God I didn't believe in. After several endless rings, a calm, professional voice answered. "Hello, this is Agatha Reynolds." The words came out jumbled and garbled. "I'm terribly, terribly sorry, but there's been an emergency. The committee has been waiting for 15 minutes, Ms. Reynolds," the voice interrupted me politely but firmly. "We have a busy interview schedule today. Some committee members have flown in especially. Unfortunately, we have to move on." "Please," I blurted out, and I felt a searing shame flood my face. It was a family situation. I was physically locked in. I literally couldn't leave the house. I heard myself rambling some kind of delusional, implausible nonsense, and I hated myself for it. I sounded exactly as they always described: hysterical, out of control, unable to control my life. "I understand that circumstances may have arisen," the recruiter's voice softened, but there was not a hint of compliance. "However, this position requires absolute reliability and stress tolerance. Many qualified candidates applied for it, and they showed up on time. We can keep your resume in our database, but this recruitment is closed." Closed. The word hung in the air, as final as the click of that lock. "Yes," I whispered, my voice suddenly very quiet and even. "Of course. Thank you for your time." I hung up before the slightest tremor could be heard. For a long moment, I simply stood in the middle of the room, staring at the dark, lifeless screen of my phone. In its glass reflection, a stranger stared back at me, the same one who had briefly dared to emerge from her assigned role as family ghost, only to be roughly and forcefully pushed back into the darkness. A wave of despair washed over me, so heavy and dense that I had to sit on the edge of the bed to keep from collapsing onto the floor. All those sleepless nights, all those rehearsals in front of the mirror, that fragile yet stubborn hope, it all evaporated in a single hour, unsolicited. "This can't be happening," I whispered into the void again. But it was happening. It had happened. And the most piercing pain didn't even come from the company's decision. I could understand their logic. It came from the fact that the people who were supposed to be my support had destroyed my chance before I even reached the starting line. They had clipped my wings, right there on the runway. Finally, there was a knock on the door. Without waiting for an answer, Mom poked her head in. "So how was it?" she asked, as if wondering if it was raining outside. "How did your big interview go?" I slowly looked up at her. For a second, I even thought she'd actually forgotten, or pretended to. But then I saw it, that quick, fleeting glimmer of guilt, immediately buried under a layer of irritation. She knew. They both knew what they were doing. "I missed it," I said, my voice surprisingly flat, without intonation, because I was locked in the closet and physically couldn't get out. Mom's eyes instantly narrowed, a familiar, defensive glint flashing in them. "Don't start your drama again. Your sister just wanted you to come to your senses. You get so worked up about everything." "You could have called and rescheduled." I called. They said no. They were gathering people together on purpose. I ruined it. It's over. Because of you. Because of her. Her lips pressed into a thin, disapproving line. "Watch your tone, Agatha," she said sharply. "Don't blame your lack of foresight on us. If you calculated everything to the last detail, then maybe you weren't prepared." At that very moment, something inside me, small, weak, and still waiting for something, completely died. The part of me that was still searching for excuses whispered, maybe they didn't mean any harm, or what if I really am overreacting? No, it was simpler and more terrible. I was slowly gassed in my own home for years. As my mother, having already mentally written off this conversation, turned to leave, I heard a clear, cold question inside me. How many times have I allowed them to write a story where the problem was me? And when will I finally start writing my own? As the door closed behind her, I took out my phone. My finger trembled over the recorder icon, then pressed play. Their voices burst from the small speaker, clear, pitiless, stripped of the protective shell of home. She probably would have failed anyway. She's so dramatic. You're doing her a favor. I listened to the recording once. Tears streamed down my face in hot, silent streams, leaving salty tracks on my skin. Then I pressed play again. And strangely enough, from the second listening, something different began to grow inside me. Not a new despair, but a strange, chilling calm. It wasn't just pain anymore. It was evidence, irrefutable proof of how paltry their faith in me had been. Proof that I wasn't going crazy, that I wasn't exaggerating. I'd simply finally removed the film from the lens and seen the image in sharp focus. The despair hadn't disappeared. It had changed its state of aggregation, crystallized into something sharp and hard. Not a blind breakdown, but a cold, ruthless determination. Maybe I couldn't bring back that lost morning, but I could decide what would happen to all the mornings that came after. And for the first time in my life, my next step wasn't planned with their convenience in mind. Sleep didn't come that night. Every time my eyelids closed, I saw that narrow crack under the closet door again, smelled the old wood and dust, heard that fateful click. The glowing numbers on my phone danced before my eyes, a countdown to ruin. The recruiter's calm voice cut through, sounding like a death sentence. But loudest of all, most insistent, was the recording. My mother's voice, lazy and convinced. She probably would have failed anyway. It repeated like a broken record, becoming a mantra of my failure. Around 2 a.m, I gave in. I turned on the ghostly glow of the nightlight and sat up in bed, looking around my room. Everything here was painfully familiar. Walls covered with Post-it notes with quotes and formulas, colorful planners, neat stacks of books, a vision board with magazine clippings, New York skyscrapers, stylish offices, silhouettes of confident people. These images now seemed alien, belonging to some other naive Agatha, who still believed that you could simply work hard and achieve your goals. But that girl died today in the closet. I pulled the thick hardcover notebook I always used for study plans and work schedules from the shelf and opened it to a blank page. My pen paused. Where to begin? I usually started with lists: to do, learn, call. Instead, I wrote 3 words at the top: Dear Future Me. It seemed stupid, a cheap psychological trick, until the moment when the words began to flow, breaking the dam inside. Dear Future Me, if you're reading this, it means you lived through the day your own family locked you in a closet and laughed while you wasted the most important chance of your life at the time. It also means you did something with that pain. You didn't let it bury you. Right now, I'm furious. I feel small, stupid, and utterly humiliated. Part of me still wonders, what if this whole thing really was my fault? Did I time it just right? Didn't scream loud enough? Didn't foresee the people who were supposed to love me sabotaging me? But the other part of me, the one that's awake at 2 a.m. writing this letter, knows something else. Today wasn't a fluke. It was the culmination, the final chapter of the book they've been writing about me for years. I started writing out the memories, one by one, like I'm picking out splinters. That time my sister accidentally submitted my school essay to a citywide competition under her name and won. My parents said, "It doesn't matter whose name is on top. Winning stays in the family. We're all proud," meaning her. That time, I paid for my own exam prep courses while working 2 jobs, and they hired a private tutor for her at an exorbitant price, calling it a strategic investment in the future. That time I beamed at dinner as I told them about the modest scholarship I'd won, and my mother, without looking up from her salad, said, "That's sweet, dear," and immediately changed the conversation to my sister's weekend plans. The more I wrote, the more the pattern became clear, garish, and obvious. She was a masterpiece, invested completely. I was a draft on the back of a bill, useful, functional, but not worth any resources. So here's the plan, I wrote, the letters pressing into the paper with renewed vigor. Goal number 1, get out of here. Physically, financially, emotionally. I won't spend the rest of my life in a house where I'm systematically convinced of my inadequacy. I will save every penny. I'll take any extra work. I'll take freelance commissions. I'll economize on everything except my own care. Goal number 2, build myself in silence and the shadows. If they want to believe in my weakness, so be it. I'll apply to programs they won't know about, look for internships in other cities, refine my skills through online courses, expand my portfolio, build my connections. I will prepare so that when the next door opens, I won't just walk in. I'll walk in so irresistible, it won't be closed. Goal number 3, never forget. Never. When I achieve my goal, and I will, it won't be because of their belief. It will be in spite of everything. And when they try to rewrite history one day, as they always do, I will have proof. This record, these pages, my memory. I paused, feeling my fingers go numb with tension. This was no longer just a career-saving plan. It was a manifesto, a war to revise the narrative they had controlled for too long. The revenge I was thinking of had nothing to do with screaming or scandals. It consisted of living a life so vibrant, so full, and so far removed from their script that their old words would begin to sound ridiculous even in their own ears. But if I were completely honest with myself, there was also a dark, deep crack in this plan. A part of me that craved not just success, but for them to at least once feel that very smallness and helplessness. They saw something they considered their property and their achievement slip forever from their grasp because of their own irrevocable choice. As if summoned by this dark thought, the phone quietly vibrated on the mattress. Text. From her. Still sulking? This is ridiculous. I tried to help. You'll thank me when you're not locked away in some boring office for 40 years, cursing every day. I stared at the glowing screen. My fingers, which had just been clutching the pen with such force, began to tremble. Previously, there would have been one of 2 scenarios: an outburst of rage, after which I would have been accused of hysteria, or, more likely, a muffled, Okay. Spoken to maintain the semblance of peace. This time, I chose neither. Instead, I opened the voice recorder app again and pressed play. Her carefree laughter, my mother's approving silence, their lazy, total disregard for everything that constituted my future. I listened without blinking. Then I returned to the notepad and wrote 2 more goals under the ones I'd already written. The ink fell to the paper with cold precision. Additional goal number 4, make sure they understand what they've done. Not through hysterics, through irreversible consequences. Additional goal number 5, convey to my sister the simple truth. By taking away my chances, she ultimately loses hers. From that night on, my life was torn in 2. On the surface, I remained the same Agatha, going to my part-time job at the cafe, washing dishes after dinner, pretending to be that sensitive girl who probably really did exaggerate everything. But beneath this thin veneer of normality, in the quiet of the night and secluded moments, I was building something they couldn't see and couldn't control. A network of contacts, a meticulously crafted plan, and a new version of myself, one whose self-esteem no longer relied on their meager hands. And as I secretly applied for internships and programs in cities whose names they couldn't even remember, I stumbled upon something that took my breath away. A position at a company that not only perfectly matched my skills, but, ironically, directly intersected with my sister's carefully crafted career path. It was at that moment that my simple survival plan mutated. It evolved into something more complex and purposeful, a plan to strike back. 3 months later, I sat in the spacious, light-flooded lobby of a modern office, awaiting the final round of selection for the Leadership Development Program. No one at home knew about this, especially Natalie. I had already completed the online tests, the case studies, the group discussion, and for the first time in a long time, I felt not fear, but a cold confidence. I belonged in this room, this space filled with goal-oriented people. The coordinator smiled politely. We'll wait for the last candidate, and then we'll begin. Then the glass doors slid open, and she fluttered in. Natalie. An immaculate blazer, an immaculate ponytail, a flawless, practiced smile of confidence. All of this shattered the moment her gaze fell on me. Her face became a mask of icy bewilderment. "What are you doing here?" she hissed, coming so close I could smell her perfume. "The same as you," I replied calmly, not even looking up from the brochure in my hands. "The final interview." She leaned even closer, her voice low and harsh. "You know they're only taking a few people, right? One of us will lose." A few months ago, those words would have crushed me, making me question my right to be here. Now, they merely drew clear lines of battle before me. I finally looked up at her. "May the best candidate win," I said in a flat, almost dispassionate tone. Eventually, we were separated into separate conference rooms. Muffled snatches of questions drifted through the thin walls. Someone was asking her about working under stress and tight deadlines. I almost laughed out loud. In my session, I spoke honestly about my failures, without naming names, about how I learned to rise without anyone's support, how I turned doors slammed in my face into fuel for my motivation. No tears, no excuses, just facts and the very resilience I had to forge myself. In a one-on-one conversation with the gray-haired, attentive director, he asked about the gap in my resume after university. "A major opportunity fell through due to external circumstances beyond my control," I said, looking him straight in the eye. "Instead of giving up, I used that time for in-depth study, freelance projects, and volunteer work. It taught me to draw strength even from seemingly impossible situations." He merely nodded, making a note. "We value people who know how to not just fall, but bounce back from the bottom," he said. When it was over, all the candidates were invited back into the lobby. The director walked out, accompanied by HR, holding a piece of paper. He read out the names. Mine was the first. Agatha Reynolds. My heart stopped for a moment, and then began pounding so hard it seemed like everyone in the room could hear it. I stood up and shook his outstretched hand. "Welcome to the team. We're so happy to see you," I heard him say warmly. Over his shoulder, I saw Natalie. She stood straight, a smile frozen on her face, still waiting for her name to be called. It never was. When the list was finalized, those who hadn't been chosen were politely thanked for their participation. Natalie stood motionless, as if her roots had grown through the expensive parquet floor. Her expression was one of shock. Not just shock, but a complete collapse of her worldview. As she exited the building, she caught up with me, grabbing my elbow so hard it hurt. "It's not fair," she breathed, her shining eyes filled with pure, undisguised horror. "I've been working toward this for years. I had it all planned out. Mom and Dad, they always said you were the one who had it easy, and me, that I'd probably fail if I didn't try harder." She swallowed, and in that moment, she looked less like an angry sister and more like a frightened child. "You're going to tell them I lost, right? You're going to tell them it was a fair fight?" That's what she really feared, not the defeat itself, but their disappointed looks, their quiet sighs, their next, "we told you so." I slowly pulled my hand from her grip and met her gaze. In her pupils, I saw our reflection. Two sisters whose roles in the family drama had just been turned upside down. "I'll tell them the truth," I said quietly, but perfectly clearly. The whole truth, starting from that morning. For the first time in years, I entered the living room not stealthily, but firmly, stepping across the familiar carpet. My parents were sitting on the couch, the TV flickering with the silent images of some soap opera. "You're back," my father said, looking up from the screen. "So, how are you doing?" My mother glanced at me, that same tired and already disappointed look. She was expecting another tale of failure. I didn't put on an act. She didn't pause. "I got in," I said, the words ringing out in the silence like a gunshot. "I made it into the leadership development program. I'm moving in 2 months." The silence that followed was thick and staggering. Shock, like a physical wave, rolled across their faces. "What?" Mom whispered, frowning. "When did you even apply? How come we didn't know anything?" A short, dry laugh escaped me. "The last time I shared an important opportunity with you, you locked me in a closet, and you all agreed I'd fail anyway. I think that's discouraged me from sharing." She immediately raised her head defensively. "That's not how it was. You started panicking. Your sister just wanted to help you pull yourself together." I didn't argue. I simply pulled out my phone, found the recording, and pressed play. Their own voices, muffled by the door but all the more monstrous for it, filled the room. "She's hysterical again. You're doing her a favor. She probably would have failed anyway. Why waste time and upset everyone?" My father's face fell in silent horror. My mother turned as white as a wall. "You recorded us?" my father whispered, full of disbelief. "You locked me in," I replied, my voice surprisingly calm. "You laughed while I lost something very important. I needed proof, to stop doubting my own sanity. Mom tried to justify herself, saying she wanted to spare me disappointment, that it was bearable. But her words hung in the air, pathetic and false, against the chilling cruelty coming from the speaker. "You weren't protecting me," I interrupted. "You were protecting an image that suited you, a weak, hysterical, eternal second fiddle who shouldn't overshadow your golden child." At that moment, the front door clicked. Natalie walked into the living room. Her eyes were red and puffy, and her face was frozen in fear as she heard the final seconds of the recording. Mom turned sharply to face her. "Is it true?" Her voice trembled with something new, maybe shame, maybe anger. "You locked her out on purpose? On the day of the interview?" Natalie's gaze darted to my phone, and understanding flashed in her eyes. And anger. "Of course, you wrote it all down. You enjoy making me look like a monster, right?" "You did it yourself," I retorted coldly. "I just pressed a button." My parents' shock was at its worst, but the final blow was yet to come. They found out that Natalie had also been in that program, and that she hadn't been chosen. "They chose Agatha?" Mom whispered, as if she'd heard the laws of gravity lift. "Not you?" Natalie cringed as if she'd been struck. "Are you happy?" she snapped at me, her voice no longer laced with anger, but with a desperate, childish resentment. Now they're disappointed in me. You got everything you wanted. What I wanted, I said quietly but clearly, was for my own family not to put a spoke in my wheel. You stole my first chance. I rebuilt myself. You had all the resources, all the advantages, and you still lost. It's not on my conscience. It's on yours. My father finally spoke, his voice dull and tired. We were wrong. We took you for granted. We didn't think it would cost you so much. We thought you'd always be there. Understanding. My mother's eyes filled with tears, the first real ones, not from irritation. I'm sorry, she breathed out, for the closet, for those words, for all the times we made you feel insignificant. Natalie couldn't get the words, I'm sorry, out, but she managed to squeeze out, I didn't think you'd actually miss it. I thought you'd panic, they'd reschedule, and everything would be fine. I didn't expect that you'd win later. It wasn't an apology. It was an admission of her own blindness and selfishness, an admission that she simply hadn't considered the consequences for me. And now what? My father asked, and there was genuine, deep anxiety in his voice. You'll leave and erase us from your life? I looked around the room, this museum of her achievements, where my diplomas lay in a folder on the top shelf. This entire system of coordinates in which I was just a backdrop. Now I'm taking this job and leaving. I need space to breathe. Maybe one day, if you truly change, and it's not just guilt, we can try to build something new. But I'm done living here by your rules. I turned to Natalie. As for you, I don't know if I can ever forgive this. It depends not on what you say today, but on who you decide to become tomorrow. That night, for the first time, I began to pack my things for real. Without fuss, without tears, methodically and calmly. Clothes, books, a laptop, and that same hardcover notebook, the first page of which read, Dear Future Me. Months later, in my small but private apartment with a prestigious company badge on a hook by the door, I reread these lines and smiled, quietly, without malice. The joke had truly cost them far more than they could have imagined. The price wasn't just a missed interview, but the version of me that still needed their approval to feel human. My revenge wasn't about ruining their lives. It was about breaking free from the role they'd written for me and living a life that proved them wrong from the start. And if you're listening to this, ask yourself right now, who in your life is holding the lock, convincing you that you're simply exaggerating, trying to open your own door?